I hope that the people of Minnesota are watching, because I think that people of faith are the people that are being marginalized here.
What you're about to hear, you're not going to believe. Your instinct, your defensive response is going to be, this can't possibly be true. But it is true.
Minnesota Democrats nullified the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. They nullified your right to religious expression and freedom of association and freedom of speech.
Jimmy, you say that really quickly like that, and I think half the folks, oh, he's over-exaggerating. They didn't take away the First Amendment. We would have read about that.
The administration and the majority has declared open season on traditional faith, saying you are welcome here, as I heard across the other side of the aisle. That's only true for some Minnesotans.
And what's being erased here is the ability for folks with deeply held beliefs to keep and stay in line with those deeply held beliefs.
Religious testifiers here were told that they're not welcome, that they're casting stones, that their religious views are wrong. That's not one Minnesota. That's one way. That's one view. That's government control. That is totalitarianism. It's wrong.
When we talk about marginalized communities, what's happening is the faith community is being marginalized right now. That's what's happening here. This is a building block of our country, and I know many of you have problems with that, but it's a building block of our country. It's been upheld, religious liberties have been upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States over the course of the history of our country. And what's happening right now is you're trying to erase that.
Let me walk you through the process,
Please,
okay?
please
So that you can understand. What they did on its face seems relatively simple. They added gender identity as a protected class in the Human Rights Act.
But when we changed that last year to have a new separate definition of gender identity, there was no corresponding language in the religious exemption that was added to make clear that we as a state respect the fact that religious organizations might have diverse views about questions related to gender identity that we accept as part of their religious exercise and important in our respect for religious pluralism.
What that did in effect was open up all of these institutions, schools, churches, faith communities, mosques, opened them all up to claims of discrimination based upon gender identity. So you can now have lawsuits for such things as not allowing a man to be in the bathroom with your daughter at church. Harry Niska brought an amendment to fix this issue, to reinsert gender identity into the religious exemption of the Human Rights Act in order to restore the religious liberty protections for our institutions, our churches, our synagogues, our mosques, our religious schools. Not only was that amendment voted down on a party line, it was also made explicitly clear by Chair Becker-Fenn that this was not an oversight on her part. She literally said that.
I mean, I can say as a legislator, it was not an oversight. I was aware that language was there.
She indicated that her legislative intent with the Human Rights Act last year was to cancel the First Amendment. It's not an oversight on my part, she said. You then had Byron Curran and Lee Finke and Representative Frederick, who was carrying the bill, berate, demean, and slander the entire religious community of the state of Minnesota, who was represented by testifiers who crossed the Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, and Muslim community.
And I would note that many of those groups did ask the commissioner to include this fix in her policy bill, and it's not there.
Madam Chair and member of the committees, my name is Zahir Babar, and I'm the president of the Islamic Center of Minnesota.
Good morning, Dan Beckering, head of school at Southwest Christian High School in Chaska. We have 500 students in our high school.
I am Yen Fasano. I'm the associate director here for the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis.
My name is Reverend Frederick Hintz, and I speak as a representative of the roughly 500 congregations and schools of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod here in Minnesota.
Please consider adopting the A2 amendment, which would protect the religious organizations and schools by restoring the religious exemption in the Minnesota Human Rights Act. The removal last year of the religious exemption related to gender identity discrimination marginalizes people of faith by suggesting that what was held to be the common inheritance of all people regarding men, women, and the family is somehow discriminatory.
Our state and education system are made stronger by the fact that Minnesota families can choose between a variety of public, private, and faith-based schools. Parents naturally desire to have their children taught in a school environment that is aligned with their values and convictions. When I meet prospective parents, the number one thing they want to hear from me is if I hire teachers to educate their children that will support and encourage their deeply held Christian beliefs.
In order to maintain the integrity and vitality of our ministry, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod has always considered it crucial that our leaders be deeply and personally committed to the mission and values of our church, living them out in their personal lives, including matters related to sexual identity.
We know the values of Catholic schools in these urban neighborhoods. It serves as an oasis, and it contributes widely to the greater community. And we serve these families and these students not because they are Catholic, but because we are Catholic, and we're rooted in the gospel teaching to have a preferential option for the poor and to teach them in virtue and formation of excellence.
We can respect all people while still allowing faith-based organizations to choose their leaders and teachers according to their missions and values.
Faith-based institutions like my school cannot accomplish their mission if they do not have the autonomy to make governance and hiring decisions that are firmly aligned with their religious beliefs.
Indeed, we have always regarded our ability to choose our leaders without government interference to be a core component of the religious liberty guaranteed to us in the Constitution.
This issue matters to our Catholic schools in the Archdiocese because it is precisely our gospel value that motivates us to serve. We cannot compartmentalize our service to those with how we understand human sexuality.
We want to believe the omission of the exemption was merely an oversight that can be fixed and that we can move forward together in a spirit of true pluralism, recognizing that different people have different values and that should be respected.
These rights have always been protected by the U.S. and Minnesota Constitutions and should be reflected in the Minnesota Human Rights Act.
It is therefore disturbing to us when the state of Minnesota takes actions which place this fundamental right in jeopardy, as it has recently done. In fact, we regard the recent removal of the religious exemption from a portion of the Minnesota Human Rights Act to be a direct attack on the autonomy of the church and on the religious liberty rights of each of our members. Furthermore, in choosing to live our lives acknowledging the reality of God-given biological sexual differences, we insist that far from being bigoted, we are in fact expressing a true love of neighbor. And so I urge you to respect the substantial and unique contributions of the church to our society by passing the A2 amendment, restoring once again the guarantee of religious liberty to our citizens, churches, and schools.
This is very disturbing. I am appalled that we are having this discussion. This is infuriating. This is absolutely infuriating. Somebody had mentioned that this is a direct attack, and you're absolutely right. This is a direct attack against the trans and non-binary communities, not just here in Minnesota, but across the country, where we are seeing people flee their states because of things like this. Last session, Minnesota said you are welcome here, and we're not going to dial that back. We stand firm that all are welcome here in Minnesota. So no, you cannot respect all people when you don't believe certain people exist. And I'm here to say that we do exist, and we're sitting in this room right in front of you. So if you can't understand identity, whether it's sexual identity or gender identity, perhaps, just perhaps, you might want to look people in the eye who do exist and are telling you that we are here as non-binary or trans. You can no longer claim that we don't exist or that you don't believe we are here. If you don't believe I am here, who is speaking to you right now? You need to hear this. If we are talking about dignity, where is the dignity in not recognizing our fellow neighbors? Where is the dignity in saying you are not accepted here? In accomplishing what mission exactly? Is that to erase thousands of people who are already here, people who have existed since the beginning of time?
We have refugees moving to Minnesota. You heard this, and it's not a joke. States are doing everything they can to literally, actually erase and eradicate trans people and encourage them to leave where they live.
We are not here trying to erase anyone. We are here trying to uphold a constitutional right that was foundational to our state and our country. And what's being erased here is the ability for folks with deeply held beliefs to keep and stay in line with those deeply held beliefs. When we talk about marginalized communities, what's happening is the faith community is being marginalized right now. That's what's happening here. This is a building block of our country, and I know many of you have problems with that, but it's a building block of our country. It's been upheld, religious liberties have been upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States and of this country over the course of the history of our country. And what's happening right now is you're trying to erase that. And that's not okay. I hope people in the public are listening to this conversation. They're trying to erase religious freedom in the United States of America, in the state of Minnesota. This is a pivotal point, folks.
It is hard to sit here and listen to some of the testifiers that have come up to share. I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school. I was one of those kids that you're describing, going to a K-12 education in a Catholic school, going to church every week at school, going to church every weekend with my parents. The core takeaway of that education for me and my religious background was to love thy neighbor, was to accept thy neighbor. I want to think of a Bible quote that says, "Those without sin cast the first stone." Everyone that came up to testify today was casting stones. Hatred throughout our history has shown up in different ways. Judgment in our history has shown up in different ways. Go back far enough, that deeply held belief was that someone of a different skin color is a substandard human being, and we should be able to treat them however we want. That was the, quote, status quo of the time. The status quo sometimes needs to be broken. Hatred today shows up as an amendment of adding the words gender identity to a bill, which is antithetical to my upbringing and is a hatred that I will not be part of.
Well, folks, the mask is off. This is a very simple question about religious freedom, religious pluralism, or government control. Are the religious views of religious associations, religious corporations, religious societies, or any institution organized for educational purposes that is operated, supervised, and controlled by a religious association, religious corporation, or religious society? That's the language from the bill. That's all we're talking about. Are the views of those organizations controlled by the individual freedom of the religious people who form those associations, or are they controlled by the governor and the legislature of the state of Minnesota? That's the question we're voting on here today. If you think that those religious views should be controlled by the legislators here who told the testifiers that their religious views are wrong, then vote no. If you think that we should have pluralism in Minnesota so that the DFL legislators who express their religious views should be allowed to hold them, and religious organizations that hold different views should also be allowed to hold them and live out those views, then you need to vote yes. If you support the First Amendment protecting freedom of speech, that protects ministerial protections for religious organizations to choose who is part of their religious organization, how they organize themselves to be consistent with their religious faith, then you need to vote yes. And that the people of Minnesota are watching. Because I think that people of faith are the people that are being marginalized here. The administration and the majority has declared open season on traditional faith, saying you are welcome here, as I heard across the other side of the aisle. That's only true for some Minnesotans. Everyone on the other side, yes, you exist, but your existence does not give you the right to tell other people how they can believe and how they can practice their faith. Religious testifiers here were told that they're not welcome, that they're casting stones, that their religious views are wrong. That's not one Minnesota. That's one way. That's one view. That's government control. That is totalitarianism. It's wrong.
My fear is nobody's going to care. And that's based upon past experience. My fear is we're going to sound the alarm bell on this, and it's not going to make any difference because everybody's just going to resign themselves to being subordinated by the state of Minnesota.
What do I got to do? What do we do, sir? I guess I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I don't get to vote on this stuff until November. And is that when I have an opportunity to do something? What is regular Minnesotans supposed to do if this does rile you up?
Well, this sort of thing has happened before, and I hope you'll indulge me in pointing to a very specific example, okay?
Sure.
So we're all familiar with, and it was told as a childhood story as we were growing up, the account of Daniel being thrown to the lions, right? And Daniel in the lion's den.
Yeah.
So let's look at the context of where that happened. So Daniel was an official under a King Darius. And he was doing really well for himself and advancing through the ranks. And so his colleagues around him, his cohort, were very jealous of that. And so they devised a way to attack him using the law as their weapon. And this is what they did. I'm going to read from Daniel chapter 6, starting in verse 6.
Go ahead.
They said that the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. And this is the answer to your question. What should we do? When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, so he made a conscientious decision in light of the law. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. Amen. That's what we're doing. I think the defining characteristic of how Daniel responded to the same issue in his time is that we're going to live faithfully regardless of what your law says. We are in civil disobedience territory now. Like literally to live, think, act, speak, proceed as a religious person in the state of Minnesota under any of these Abrahamic faiths, you now have to live in civil disobedience. Your existence as such is an act of civil disobedience under this change in law.
The silent majority is going to have to stop being silent.
Yeah, they're going to have to stop being suppressed because the silence is a choice. I had a meeting with a gal yesterday that was not scheduled. She just stopped by my office and she told me her story. You know, she is going to school and she's older, she's over 60. She was deeply concerned about me not identifying her, even the fact that we were talking, because the fact that she's even associating with me and talking to me about anything could have a negative impact upon her emergent career that she's trying to get into. We're in my office with the door closed, and she's looking over her shoulder as she's disclosing her deeply held beliefs about politics and culture. That's suppression. That's oppression. That is the choice to be silent because we have allowed ourselves to be cowed and put into a position of fear. And in doing that, we are bowing to the idol, we are deferring to the king, and we are not living faithfully to the Lord our God.